The first sign was not a roar, but silence, an unnatural hush that followed the dust-brown lion as he stumbled out of the thorn brush. His legs carried him only a few uncertain paces before giving way, folding beneath him like dry reeds. The weight of his body hit the road with a dull thud, sending up a small cloud of pale dust. He lay still beside the stranger's jeep, his sides lifting unevenly, each breath shallow and sharp. Flies gathered quickly over a dark patch along his shoulder, a wound hidden until the faint stir of his mane exposed the tangled mat of blood and dirt. The driver froze in the seat, hands tight on the steering wheel, the hum of the idling engine suddenly loud against the stillness of the savannah. The lion's head rested on the ground, one eye half open, dull but not unseeing. For a moment there was only fear, the primal recognition of being this close to power, even as that power was broken and trembling. Then the driver's fear shifted. The lion was not a threat. He was in pain. Fingers found the radio, and a calm but urgent call was sent across the reserve channels, voice low, words clipped but steady. The message carried quickly. A lion had collapsed beside the western track, wounded and in need. The road was empty, but for the man and the great cat. He edged the jeep forward, careful with the clutch, moving just enough so the vehicle's shadow fell across the lion's rib cage. Heat shimmered off the gravel, and the shade offered a small relief, though the lion did not stir. His tail twitched once, a tiny movement that broke the stillness, and then settled again. Dust clung to his whiskers. Every rise and fall of his chest seemed a battle between will and gravity. The minutes stretched long, the air was thick with the midday sun, cicadas grinding in the scrub. The wound along the lion's shoulder was swollen and raw, rimmed with dried fur and an edge of angry red. Each breath made it tremble slightly, as if pain rippled beneath the skin. The driver leaned out the window, watching closely, his eyes searching for signs of strength. An ear flick, a shift of paw, the slow roll of breath. The lion gave only silence, broken by the occasional rasp of his throat. A pair of hornbills wheeled overhead, their wings catching the light. Far beyond, the low hills shimmered blue in the heat. It was the kind of scene the driver had seen countless times before, yet now every detail was sharpened by the presence of the fallen animal. He spoke softly, though he knew the lion could not understand. "Easy, boy. Just hold on." The words drifted no louder than the wind across the grass. Closer to the ground, the lion's flank rose in uneven rhythms. His body bore the mark of strength, but that strength had been worn thin by struggle. Dust clung to his mane, and small beads of sweat gathered at the man's temple as he sat in quiet vigil. The smell of earth, of blood, of heat pressed heavily. The jeep's shadow moved slowly with the sun, a fragile line of shelter across the injured frame. The lion shifted once, a sound escaping him, half moan, half growl, as if even in weakness he resisted. His head lifted a fraction, eyes narrowing before falling shut again. For the stranger in the jeep, the sound cut deeper than fear. It was the sound of endurance tested near its end. The man's hand lingered near the radio again, but the call had already been made. Help would come. All that could be done now was to wait and to watch, holding space for the animal in his moment of vulnerability. Time slowed to the rhythm of breath and stillness. The air smelled of dry dust and warm iron. The lion's chest rose, faltered, rose again. Each movement of his body spoke without words. Exhaustion, pain, but also the faint, stubborn thread of survival. The driver sat quietly, offering nothing more than shade and presence, a stranger caught in the delicate balance between wildness and care. By the time the first answering crackle came back across the radio, the silence had deepened around them. The man lowered the device, his eyes never leaving the lion lying beside his jeep. The animal's body remained pressed against the earth, fragile yet unyielding, a silent figure waiting for help in the harsh light of day. The stillness on the road grew heavy, broken only by the cicadas that rasped from the thorn trees and the low pulse of the sun overhead. The lion had not moved more than a twitch of his tail, his body stretched out along the edge of the gravel, ribs lifting in a shallow rhythm. Dust clung to his mane, and the wound along his shoulder glistened darkly where flies gathered. The stranger in the jeep had kept the engine running low, a steady hum in the silence, as if that quiet presence might offer steadiness. When the guide arrived, called in from a nearby track, the two men exchanged no words of alarm, only nods, their voices kept low as they moved calmly to place warning markers further down the road. The lion deserved silence, not noise. Time slowed, stretched by the fragile uncertainty of each breath. The men watched with patient eyes, not moving closer than necessary, giving the lion the dignity of distance. A twitch of the ear at the whine of a beetle, a flick of the tail against the dust, the faint roll of his paw, all small signs that life still held on. These small movements carried weight, offering reassurance in a moment otherwise dominated by helpless waiting. The lion's head remained pressed to the earth, whiskers splayed, his eyes half shut, but never entirely surrendering. Heat shimmered across the road, rising in waves that blurred the outline of the hills. The air grew thick, dry, and heavy, pressing down like a hand. The lion's breath rasped unevenly, but he did not cry out. His endurance was shown instead in the refusal to release his hold on life. The stranger leaned against the jeep, arms folded, watching with quiet focus. Sweat trickled from his hairline, but his gaze never shifted from the lion. The guide stood nearby, occasionally lifting his radio to check for updates. When he spoke, his words were gentle, as if they might carry across to the fallen cat. "Stay with us, old boy," he murmured, his voice softer than the rustle of the thornbrush. A herd of impala drifted into view at the far side of the plain, their bodies alert, ears flicking, watching the motionless lion from a cautious distance. Their instinct pulled them close enough to observe, but their legs kept them ready to flee. Above, a pair of vultures circled lazily, their shadows gliding across the ground. The sight deepened the urgency felt by the men, but they held themselves still. Intervention was coming. Rushing forward now would only bring fear to an already weakened animal. The waiting stretched into nearly an hour. Each minute was measured not by clocks but by the rise and fall of the lion's chest. Sometimes it paused, so long and uncertain that both men found themselves holding their own breath in unison, waiting for the chest to lift again. When it did, shallow though it was, relief spread between them without words. In that silence, they shared a bond built not from fear, but from the quiet act of keeping watch. Every heartbeat felt like something entrusted to their presence. At last, from beyond the ridge, the low rumble of a vehicle carried through the heat haze. The guide lifted his head, his shoulders easing. Slowly, a white truck crested the rise, its sides marked with the emblem of the reserve. Dust rose around its tires, drifting like smoke in the sun. Inside, the silhouettes of the veterinary team could be seen, calm and purposeful even at a distance. The sound of their approach broke the stillness but did not disturb the lion, who remained pressed against the earth, his breaths unchanged. The truck rolled closer, slowing to a crawl. The vet stepped out first, moving with quiet precision, his kit slung across one shoulder. The rangers followed, their boots scuffing gently on the road, their eyes steady and focused. They did not hurry, though every movement carried purpose. One of them lifted a hand in greeting to the men who had been waiting, their silent vigil now giving way to measured action. The guide lowered his radio and stepped aside, as if passing responsibility into hands long prepared for this moment. The lion stirred faintly at the new scent in the air. His ear flicked, his tail thumped once against the ground. The vet paused, gauging the distance, and the men all held back. Calmness was as much a tool as medicine now. The stranger exhaled slowly, his chest easing for the first time since the collapse began. Help had come, quiet and methodical, the kind of help that asked nothing of the lion except that he kept breathing just a little longer. The moment closed, not with triumph, but with relief. The fragile stillness finally balanced by steady footsteps, soft voices, and the assurance that he was no longer alone on the roadside. The truck's engine faded into silence as the team gathered their equipment, each movement deliberate and quiet. The lion lay stretched across the dusty road, his breathing shallow but steady, his body tense with the kind of strength that even injury could not fully erase. The vet prepared the dart gun, checked the dosage, and waited for the right angle. When the shot came, it was no louder than a whisper, a puff of air that struck the lion's flank and lodged beneath the skin. For a moment, nothing changed. The cat's tail flicked once, his ear twitched, and his chest continued to rise and fall in uneven rhythm. Slowly, though, the weight in his muscles began to ease. He softened against the ground, but his head remained lifted, amber eyes dull but unyielding. Sedation could quiet the body, but it could not take away the instinct to endure. The team approached in silence, their steps unhurried. A ranger lifted a hand, signaling for stillness, before kneeling beside the massive frame. The lion's mane was thick and tangled, the coarse hairs clumped together with dirt and dried blood. The vet parted it carefully, pushing aside the stiff strands to reveal the source of suffering. Beneath the fur, buried deep into swollen flesh, lay the thin metallic bite of a snare wire. It had cut through skin and muscle, tightening each time the animal had strained against it. The wound was raw, swollen, and rimmed with infection, its bitter smell rising into the heat. Gloved hands moved with precision, the vet murmuring softly to the rangers as they steadied the lion's great head and shoulders. One ranger produced cutters, the metal flashing briefly in the sunlight. They worked with patience, snipping through strands of wire, easing each twist free of the torn skin. The lion gave a muffled growl, more vibration than sound, his body resisting even through sedation. A hand rested lightly against his flank, steady and respectful. "Easy, boy," one ranger breathed, his voice barely above the drone of insects. The words were less for control than for presence, an offering of calm in a moment balanced between fear and trust. The stranger stood a short distance away, his hands trembling, despite being held tight against his sides. He had never seen a lion so close, never imagined such power could be brought down by something as small as a loop of wire. The sight of the infection, the swollen wound buried under the mane, filled him with both sorrow and a helpless kind of awe. He stayed silent, watching as the rangers bent to their work, their movements measured, their faces set with quiet focus. The vet flushed the wound with saline, the clear liquid spilling over torn muscle and staining the dust dark. Antiseptic followed, sharp and clean, cutting through the sour smell of rot. The lion's ear flicked once, his chest rising heavily, his jaws parting for a low, rattling breath. The team never faltered, never raised their voices, their murmurs a steady rhythm that matched the soft hiss of fluid and the quiet snip of metal being cut free. At last, with one final movement, the wire loosened and slipped from the wound. It was a simple piece of metal, twisted and cruelly sharp, and yet it had nearly taken the life of a creature built for strength and survival. One of the rangers placed it carefully aside, a silent acknowledgement of its weight, despite its size. They worked quickly then, cleaning the wound more thoroughly, applying ointment, and stitching the torn flesh with practiced hands. Every action carried a sense of reverence, as though they knew they were not merely repairing a body but giving back the dignity that had been stolen. The lion's head sagged into the dust, his body slack but still breathing, each exhale stirring small clouds of powder around his muzzle. His paws, heavy and scarred from years of use, rested motionless, claws half-sheathed. The stranger's gaze lingered on the lion's face, where the lines of exhaustion ran deep beneath the mane. There was no triumph here, no display of power, only survival, raw and fragile. The tremor in his hands eased as he realized the work was not about control but care, a quiet partnership between humans and the wild, built not on dominance, but respect. The rangers' voices dropped even softer as the final stitch was tied, the wound cleaned, the mane brushed gently back over the shoulder. The tools were gathered, the wire sealed away, and the dust swept lightly from the lion's side. The vet checked the sedation, noting the steady beat of the great heart beneath his hand. Around them, the savannah held its breath, the cicadas pausing, the air heavy with the mingled scents of dust, blood, and medicine. The lion lay quiet, the wound now a line of raw healing rather than an open threat. It was a small victory in a vast, indifferent land, but one that mattered deeply in this moment. The work had been steady, quiet, and precise, and now the final tasks fell into place. The last of the ointment was pressed into the stitched wound, the mane brushed carefully back to cover raw skin. The vet leaned back, nodding softly, and reached for the small vial that would begin to undo the sedation. The men around him moved with the same calm rhythm they had kept since arrival, their circle of presence neither hurried nor still, simply waiting for the lion to return to himself. The stranger, standing further back near the jeep, felt the weight of the moment shift, as though the land itself was pausing. From across the plain came a shape, low against the grass, shoulders rolling in silence. Another male lion, darker in mane but no less powerful, approached with deliberate pace. His head was lowered, amber eyes fixed on the scene ahead, every step a declaration of possession and intent. The rangers froze where they stood, not in fear but in respect, knowing the bond between lions ran deeper than any intervention they could provide. The approaching male slowed as he neared. Then, instead of breaking the fragile circle, he sank into the dust a short distance away. His body stilled, his gaze never wavering. He did not challenge, he guarded. At the edge of the plain, the rest of the pride had gathered. A lioness crouched in the yellow grass, her shoulders tense, her eyes locked on the figure of her fallen companion. Two younger lions flanked her, their heads lifted, voices spilling low, soft calls that rumbled like distant thunder across the ground. The sound carried caution, recognition, a tether between family members held apart by circumstance. None of them moved closer, but their presence swelled around the scene, folding the humans into the pride's gaze. The vet crouched once more, drawing the antidote into the syringe. His hands moved without tremor, the years of practice settling into instinct. The injection slipped beneath the lion's skin, releasing the measure that would call him back from stillness. The men stepped away, creating space as the body beneath the mane began to stir. A twitch of ear, a ripple of paw, the slow roll of chest, these were the first signs. Dust rose as the lion shifted, his body struggling against the pull of exhaustion and the remnants of the drug. His eyes flickered open, unfocused at first, then narrowing as light returned. The coalition partner rose from his resting place and advanced slowly, not rushing, not forcing. His movements were measured, each paw placed firmly in the dust until he stood just beside the weakened male. He leaned close, the heavy line of his mane brushing against the stitched shoulder. Then, with a subtle weight, he pressed his flank alongside his partner's, offering steadiness without demand. Shoulder met shoulder, and for a moment, the two lions stood as one, their breath mingling in a shallow rhythm. The humans did not move, bound by the unspoken permission that had been granted. The vet lowered his hands, the rangers stood quietly, and the stranger near the jeep held his breath. The lions had drawn the circle now, and within it all were permitted, human and animal alike, so long as no one broke the fragile line of trust. The pride remained at the edge, their calls growing softer, almost questioning, waiting for a signal that it was time to reunite. The wounded lion shifted again, attempting to rise fully. His legs quivered, the stitched shoulder trembling under the effort, but the partner leaned closer, lending balance by presence alone. Dust spilled beneath their paws as he steadied himself. For the first time his chest lifted without strain, breath flowing easier, though shallow still. He blinked once, slowly, and then settled back against the ground with his companion standing guard. The pride's low calls answered in return, a dialogue carried not by words but by sound and stillness. Around them, the savannah seemed to hush. The cicadas softened, the wind fell, and even the vultures that had lingered high above drifted away on the current. Every living thing appeared to be waiting, holding its breath while one lion fought his way back into the circle of life. The humans, though central to the moment, felt themselves recede, their role reduced to stillness and patience. No more tools were needed, no more voices. Only the respectful silence that allowed the wild to claim what was always its own. The vet finally exhaled, the sound low and steady. "He'll hold now," he whispered, though no one truly needed the words. The truth was already visible in the way the two males leaned against each other, in the way the pride's calls had softened, in the way the wounded lion's eyes had found the horizon once more. The circle held, and in its quiet center, the breath of the wild moved again, fragile yet enduring, a moment shared by all who had stood still enough to witness it. The air had cooled by the time the vet stepped back, his work complete, his kit closed with slow, quiet movements. The sun dipped low, stretching the shadows of the men and the jeep across the pale road. The lion stirred, the sedation wearing thin, his body returning to its own weight and will. His mane lifted faintly in the evening wind, strands of dust-stained hair brushing over the stitched wound. He blinked, his eyes heavy but aware, and the strength of survival rose again in his chest. The rangers stood still, their silence a curtain of respect as they allowed the moment to unfold. With effort, the lion pressed his paws against the ground. The first push failed, his body sagging into the dust with a low grunt. He lay there, flanks heaving, sides rising unevenly. The men did not move closer, they simply waited. A few heartbeats later he tried again, this time lifting onto 3 good legs, the 4th trembling but bearing some of his weight. Dust clung to his whiskers, and his paws sank lightly into the gravel, but he held his stance, unsteady yet upright, His breath rasped in the cool air, nostrils widening to taste the wind that carried the scent of his pride. From the grass beyond the road, the other male stepped forward. He moved with calm assurance, lowering his head until his shoulder pressed against the injured lion's. For a moment they leaned together, their weight shared, the bond of coalition clear in their stillness. The wounded lion steadied, his legs braced, his body finding balance again. His partner remained beside him, neither urging nor resisting, only offering presence. Together, they turned toward the plain where the pride waited. The lioness rose from the grass, her body lean and strong, her tail swaying slowly behind her. The subadults lifted their heads, their low calls drifting across the distance like soft echoes. The pride did not rush forward but held their ground, patient as they watched the injured male gather the strength to return. Step by step, he began to move. Each stride was deliberate, his paw falls measured, 3 firm, 1 faltering, yet all moving forward. His partner matched him, shoulder brushing shoulder, a silent escort guiding him back to family. Behind them, the humans gathered their gear. The vet wiped his instruments, the rangers folded their tarps, and the stranger by the jeep lowered his radio. There was no celebration, no loud release of relief. Only the quiet satisfaction of work done as it needed to be done. The stranger laid his hand against the warm bonnet of the vehicle, his breath long and slow, his eyes fixed on the lions ahead. He did not need to step closer or to mark the moment aloud. It was enough simply to have been there, to have witnessed, to carry the memory as something lasting and private. The lions moved steadily, the dust rising behind them in faint trails that caught the fading light. The pride's calls grew quieter as the distance closed. A cub chirped once from the grass, high and uncertain, and the lioness flicked her tail in reassurance. The injured male lifted his head higher, nostrils flaring as the familiar scent grew stronger. He paused briefly, resting more weight on his partner's side, then pressed forward again, refusing to linger in weakness. The humans stood in silence, watching as the 2 males reached the edge of the plain. Their silhouettes cut against the sky, one tall and steady, the other marked by a faltering step, but not by defeat. The grass beyond glowed in the orange fire of sunset, blades swaying as the evening wind swept across the land. The pride closed around them slowly, voices soft, eyes steady, a family drawing back together under the vast sky. The rangers lifted their packs and turned toward the truck. The vet gave one final glance before climbing in, his face calm, lined by years of moments like this. The stranger lingered by the jeep until the lions disappeared into the glowing field, their bodies swallowed by grass and shadow. Only the sound of wind remained, carrying away the dust, erasing the line of the road, returning the land to silence. The last image was not of humans, but of the 2 lions, walking side by side into grass the color of flame, their silhouettes steady against the dying light. The miracle was not loud, not dramatic. It was quiet, folded into the wind, left behind for the wild to keep.